I want to share a rundown of what happened in our social group yesterday. I think it's difficult for me. It's always been difficult for me to explain and talk about what makes how I support the kids different than support they might get in other places or through other resources or avenues. I always have a hard time, I guess, talking about that and explaining that. And so I find that when I can just talk about what happens in the group, that's the best way I have of talking about how I support the kiddos and what they get out of it. One of the first things was that most of the students were late to the group yesterday. And I play this game with whoever comes in first, where we try to guess who's going to come in next. It's just a fun way for us to pass the time while we're waiting for everybody to get there, especially on a day like yesterday when most of the kids were late. As they came in, some of them are aware of time and they are aware that they're late. Some of them aren't at all. But they do have most of them have a sense of how many other people are already there. And so sometimes if most of the other students are there, they feel like they might be late, even if they're not. So we talk about that a lot. There's a clock in the room that they can see. Um, but most of the students were late yesterday. And so I start either on time or when we have at least three students. One of those has to be the case. And when it was time to start, we didn't have at least three students yet. So we waited for a little bit and played our game about who we thought was going to come in next. And so as students started to come in, one of them came in probably about 15 minutes late, maybe. And I knew because the parent had let me know that they were going to be late. And when he came in, he was very anxious about being late. I think it's a challenging position for kids to be in, to have anxiety about being late, because as a kid, it's almost never your fault that you're late, right? It could be parents' faults, it could be traffic. It's almost never a child's fault when they're late to something. But I definitely know a lot of kids who develop anxiety about being late. And I don't ever, I want students to come in happy. I don't want them to ever come in stressed out over something at Starfish Social Club, like being late. That's not ever what I want. And so when he came in, I could tell that he was anxious about being late. And so I always try to greet everybody by saying something like, I'm really glad you're here, or I'm glad to see you. And he immediately said, I'm sorry I'm late. And my response was, we are all late sometimes. It's okay. It happens to all of us sometimes. But thank you for acknowledging it. We had already started our group. Another thing is when students come in, if we've already started and they come in and they like announce themselves like, hey guys, that's disruptive to the group, right? Because we've already started. And not even just in my group, in a classroom, somebody coming into a classroom, maybe from being somewhere else, as an adult coming into a meeting late, anytime we join something that's structured and we are after other people, the ideal goal would be to just do what we call read the room and see that we're having a discussion, we're having a conversation. Come in, find somewhere to sit, and join us. But several of the kids came in and announced their presence instead of just slipping in and joining us. And so we talk about that as well, about how to enter a group and not make it about you, right? Not be disruptive to what's happening, to what's going on. The same on Zoom. Again, even if you're an adult, if you join something and other people are already there, just join and take a minute to figure out what's happening. So even one of the students who came in late, he looked at me, he said, what are we talking about? And I said, just listen for a few minutes and you'll be able to figure it out, right? So I'm not going to stop what I'm doing to say hello to kids coming in late, to tell them what we're talking about. I'm going to keep going. And what I want them to be able to do is to integrate into what's happening. I don't want the world to have to stop because they're coming in late. I don't want my group to have to stop. I don't want their classroom to have to stop. If they're an adult, I don't want the meeting to have to stop because we're coming in late. It's okay to be late. It happens to everybody. But how do we handle it when that happens? So it came up in the lesson. I don't remember what we were talking about, but it was a perfect opportunity for me to share about the student who came in and apologized for being late. We talked about just acknowledging if we have broken a social expectation, right? Just acknowledging it. In the lesson, we were talking about acknowledging if you realize you've been talking for too long or talking about something that other people aren't interested in. When we acknowledge it, people are much more forgiving of it. So that's what we were talking about. And I shared that, if you just say something like, I've been talking for a really long time, people are more forgiving of it when we acknowledge it. And then I mentioned that kiddo said, just like when he came in and he acknowledged that he was late. And he was like, yeah, I said sorry for being late. So yeah, and it's not a big deal. But when you acknowledge it, it just makes everybody more forgiving of it. That goes for pretty much anything social. There's a lot to be said for showing that we have some self-awareness and showing that, oh, maybe I shouldn't have said that thing, or maybe it wasn't the right time for me to, say that or do that, whatever the case may be. During the lesson, we typically sit around a table, but just because if we are on the floor, it's hard to maintain like a conversation. But I don't care if students want to walk around. I don't care if they want to be on the floor. It doesn't matter to me. One of the students asked if he could go to the floor, and I said yes. And he ended up just kind of rolling around on the floor. And it got pretty distracting, especially to one student in particular who's just really easily distracted. And I asked him to come back and join the group, and he didn't, which is totally fine. There's nothing any of the kids ever have to do at Starfish. And I even use this as a joke with them that you can lie on the floor if you want to. But what I do teach them is to notice the social consequences of the choices that we're making. And that's how I operate in general at Starfish Social Club. It has never been a treasure box. There's no sticker chart. There's no notebook back and forth to parents. I don't tell parents if, your kid laid on the floor for 20 minutes. There's no external rewards or consequences in any way. What happens is the kids learn the social consequences of the choices that they make. And then they can decide if they want to keep making that choice or if they want to make a different choice. They get to decide. And so the kiddo who was getting really distracted turned to me and said, Steph, he's just rolling around on the floor and he won't come join the group. And I said, yeah, I noticed that. And I said, what I also noticed is that we're all ignoring him. And I said, not in a mean way. Nobody's being mean or rude to him, but we are all paying attention to everybody else in the group. We were having a really great conversation about what our lesson was about. And so by default, nobody else was paying attention to him except the kid who just couldn't help but pay attention to it. And so when I said that, the kiddo who was getting really distracted was like, oh yeah, okay. And I could tell he put effort into focusing on the group. The side effect of me having that conversation is that the kiddo on the floor heard the whole thing. And so this is one of my favorite strategies is talking out loud. You can do it with another adult. If it's parent to parent, I do it sometimes with other students. Sometimes I even do it to myself when I want somebody to hear my thought process, but I don't want it to be direct. I don't want it to be directed at them because that can be perceived as confrontational. So I didn't say anything to the kiddo on the floor. I was talking to the student who was getting really distracted by it, but the kiddo on the floor heard everything I said. So I said, I just noticed that, we're not talking to him, not because we're being rude, but because he's not part of the group. He's not part of the conversation. And I said, I also notice that when we go to game time each week, you guys tend to choose somebody that you're looking at to play a game with. And so what I think might happen is because he's on the floor and nobody's looking at him, when it comes to game time, you might forget that he's even here. So again, it's all intentional, but sure enough, within seconds, the kiddo who was on the floor popped up and came over and sat next to me. He often likes to be next to me. And I turned to him and I said, I'm really glad you're back in the group. And I smiled at him and I moved my body to be physically closer to him because I was honest and genuine about that. I really was happy he was back in the group. I actually didn't expect him to make that choice. And so I really wanted to give him my social attention for making that choice. And then he sat next to me for the rest of the group and participated in the discussion that we were having. So at no point did I make him get up off the floor. At no point did I call him out in front of the other kids and, chastise him for rolling around on the floor. I pointed out to the entire group what happens if we choose to do something like that, what the likely social consequences are. And he chose to make a different choice. But it's also a learning moment for everybody in the group. And so that's exactly what happened. Moving into game time, which is the second hour of our group together, the students can play anything, including a makeup game. They can play anything as long as it's with at least one other student. So I have about 20 games that I always have, board games, card games. Sometimes students will take the games I have and make up a new way to play with them. Like, for example, they'll take the chess pieces, but play with them in an imaginary way. And sometimes they'll just make up something completely random and pretend. When students play in an imaginary way, it's more difficult than playing a structured game because there are no rules. There's nothing saying who gets to go. There's nothing saying what to do next. There's no structure to it. And so it's actually much more socially challenging to play an imaginary game than a structured game. For that reason, some students do not like to play imaginary games because they like the rules and the routine and the structure. So I do have a couple students like that they don't want to play a fake pretend made up game. They want to sit down and play a board game or a card game. The majority of students settled on playing an imaginary game. And there's always a dynamic, and for the 10 years I've been doing this, there's always a dynamic where some of the students have more of a need to be in control and want to dictate what the group is going to do and what the goal is. There are always some students who don't care. They just go with the flow. It does not matter to them. And then there are some students who are in the middle where they have an opinion, they have an idea, but if the group decides to do something else, they're pretty flexible with it. So yesterday, again, a mix of all of that, which is exactly why I love having everybody mixed in together. Because if we're all the same, if we all have the same personality type or even the same age, it gets a little boring. We are deprived of opportunities of being social with people who are different than us when we separate kids in any capacity, by age, by diagnosis, by personality. We deprive them of being able to get along and be social with people who are not like them. So I did stop the game at one point because I noticed that a couple of the kids were monopolizing the pretend play and were pretty adamant about what everybody was supposed to be doing. And I pointed out how when we play with our imaginations, that means that we have to realize that everybody who's playing is thinking something different because we all have a different imagination. And so I said, we all have to realize that everybody's thinking something different, and nobody's idea, nobody's thought about what to do next or how to play is wrong. And nobody's idea is right. They're just all different. So part of what we have to try to do when we pretend with other kids is we have to try to be open to everybody's ideas and suggestions, because nobody's in charge of imagination. Nobody gets to tell other kids what they should be thinking or doing. Everybody gets to have their own imagination. And it was interesting how much things shifted after we had that little discussion. The two kids who were trying to be more in charge of the game definitely took a step back. And it was really cool to see them integrate some of the ideas other kids had. As we went on, we meet in a public building, and we are on the second floor. And so I am always very aware and mindful of the fact that there are people around us. We meet in the evenings, and so there are a lot fewer people than there would be during the day. But for 10 years, that's something I'm always very mindful of, is that there are people around us. Because most of my students are kids, they just don't really think about that. They decided to play tag yesterday. I don't care actually if they play more physical games like tag. There was one time where they used a game I have and made up a way to play it where they were throwing plastic balls at each other. I don't care actually. But I do care about not bothering the people that are around us. And so when they started playing tag, obviously they're running. And so I paused again. I will say I love it so much that I just say, hey, everybody, pause. And they will. I really love that. They will pause. And I said, I don't ever tell somebody what to do unless it's a safety issue, which is almost never the case, which means I almost never tell any of the kids what to do. I want to open their ability to be good problem solvers. That's my goal. And so I said, how can we, it's one of my favorite ways to ask a question, how can we, or how can you? So I said, how can we play tag without running? Another really great outcome of a question like this is that I don't know what they're going to say. And a lot of times their reply will be something I wasn't even thinking about. The secondary benefit is it gives them ownership over it. Whatever they say, they're going to go with because it was their idea. It's not me saying, hey guys, don't run. So I said, how can we play tag without running? And immediately a couple of kids said, oh, we can walk. I said, okay, awesome. As long as you guys can agree to do that, you can play tag. We did have to pause and talk about it a couple more times because they're kids. It's tag. The goal is to get away from people. And so it was difficult for them to maintain a walking pace. But every one of them definitely put intentional effort into it. Another thing that came up during tag is that I noticed that one of the students didn't understand the concept of tag. He was having an amazing time, walk slash running around with everybody. He was cracking up and he was happy. Um, but when he was tagged, he did not understand the concept of him having, he was now it and he needed to tag someone else. Um, he didn't, he was not aware that he was not playing the game correctly. And I could tell that the other students didn't realize that he didn't know he was supposed to be tagging them. And so my concern was that they were going to play this game for 20 minutes and he was going to be it the whole time because he didn't understand what he was supposed to be doing. And while it was fun right now, it wasn't going to be fun for 20 minutes. So I paused the group again and I said, do you notice that there is one person in the game who doesn't understand how to play? And when I said that, I could tell that some of the kids immediately knew what I was talking about. And for some of them, that was the first time it had occurred to them that he didn't know how to play. And so I said, you know, we all have different things we understand and don't understand. This is a great example of that. This is just something that, you know, one person just doesn't understand. And I said, so what do you think we can do about that? And one of the kids immediately said, we can explain to him how to play. And I said, yeah, absolutely. But I knew they already had. They had already been told, like, hey, you got to tag somebody. And so I said, have you already tried that? And he said, oh, yeah. And so I said, okay, do you have a different idea? And then the same kiddo said, somebody else can be it and can model for him. Oh my gosh, I was thinking the first part, right? Somebody else being it, but I had not even thought about modeling for him. That was such a creative, um, a thoughtful thing for this kiddo to think about. And then what I noticed happened next is that he took that role, he became it and was modeling and telling the other kiddo like what to do, but he also intentionally did not tag the kiddo who wasn't really understanding how to tag, even though he also didn't really have a concept of like running away from the person who was it. So he's the easiest target because he doesn't really understand what's happening. But the kiddo who kind of took it upon himself to be the model intentionally did not tag him. And I thought that was just really considerate and thoughtful. And I noticed a couple of the other kids when they were it were doing the same thing. They were intentionally not tagging him because that would just be too easy. And then he would be it forever. So I did make a deal with them. It just got a little bit hectic with playing tag. And so I gave them a timeline and I said, when the timeline's over, then we'll do something else. So you guys can play tag until the timer goes off and then we'll do something else. And they all agreed to that. When the timer went off, almost all of them made a beeline over toward the students who were not playing tag and they were playing with the marble tower on the floor. So almost all of them just immediately made a beeline over there to join in the marble group, except for one student. This student often wants to play what he wants to play. The only rule for game time at Starfish is you got to play with at least one other student. It's really the only rule. And so he stayed back and kept playing the pretend game they had started out with. So like 30 minutes prior, he kept playing that game by himself. And so I reminded him that, you know, the only expectation is you got to play with at least one other person. So he went over to the group and he asked them, first he was hollering at them from across the room. And part of our lesson was getting people's attention when we're talking to them, because a really common thing that my students will do is they'll talk to somebody, without getting their attention first. And I even told them, I said, you guys, there are times that I know you're talking to me and I pretend I'm not paying attention because I want you to recognize what you need to do if you want to talk to somebody and they're not paying attention. So usually it's saying their name, right? So we actually talked about that in the lesson. And so I said, I noticed that they don't know you're talking to them because you're on the other side of the room. They don't know you're talking to them. So he's like, oh, okay. So he walked over to them and he asked them if any of them wanted to join him in what he was doing. None of them did. Um, again, I don't ever make anybody do anything. So I don't ever say, hey guys, he's asking someone to play with him. Who's going to play with him? I don't ever intervene in that. Everybody gets to play what they want to play as long as it's with one other person. So nobody chose to come play with him. And he went back and kept playing by himself. And so I said, I notice that you're playing by yourself, even though the only expectation at game time is that you play with at least one other kid. I said, so what do you think happens next? And he said, there was probably about a 5-second delay. And then he said, I need to go join the group. Which, again, I didn't know what he was going to say. There have been times where kids have just continued playing by themselves the whole time. Because, again, I don't make anybody do anything. And so on his own, he walked over and he joined the group and was fine with the group for the rest of game time. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to share. Let me see. I took a few notes. Most of it's just off the top of my head. I think that's about it. One of the last things is so now everybody was playing with the marble tower, which is really it only has enough pieces for 3, maybe 4 people. And I intentionally don't buy more pieces for it because it's a great way to either everybody builds their own very small structure or we all pool together and build something together. And so every week, this is the question, right? And it's the same with the magnetic tiles. There's only enough for 3, maybe 4 people. And so if you're going to play with them, you are going to have to figure out how to play with them together, or everybody gets a handful of pieces. So I did add the magnetic tiles to the marble tower because now everybody was playing with the marble tower and it was like twice as many people as can realistically play with it. So I added the magnetic tiles just to give them, something else that they could add on to it. But again, it's back to the conversation of if you're going, because marble towers is like everybody's favorite. So if you're going to do marble tower, you got to be able to do it with the group. It's something that you have to, nobody's in charge of the marble towers. Nobody gets to decide what to build or when to put the marbles in. It's got to be a group effort. And I heard one of the students say, I don't remember what triggered it, but I heard him say to another student, is this your marble tower? Did you pay for it? It's Steph's marble tower. And I don't intervene unless I don't think they're able to work it out without my support, which is not that often. Most of the time, I'm just listening and paying attention and seeing how things go because I want them to be able to use their skill set first before I ever step in and intervene. And most of the time, they're able to work it out. So that is a summary, a recap of just yesterday, of just all the things that we talk about, that we work on. It's not even so much of what we do isn't even about the explicit lesson that I have planned for that day. We did get through the whole lesson. We did talk about everything that I had, planned for us to do. But this is all the extra additional stuff. And I think so many kids who get social support get it in a one-on-one setting. They're not getting it around other kids. And I just feel like I don't see how that could really be successful. There's also another group. Sometimes these are same people, but there's a separate what's the word I'm trying to say? A second way that people provide social, and that's by just putting people in a group together. Like, let's have a group where kids just hang out together. If kiddos are struggling socially, there are reasons for that. And putting them in a group with other kids doesn't solve the reasons that they're struggling socially. And so even all the things I talked about that happened in the group yesterday, these are some of the reasons that my students are struggling socially. And so just going to a hangout, just being around other kids doesn't do anything to give them new skills. It's like taking a kid who can't swim and taking them to a pool party and just, oh, well, we're just going to put you in with everybody else. It's not how they learn how to swim. It's even reading, taking a kid who's struggling to read, being like, oh, we're just going to put you in this class of kids who know how to read. Or kids who don't know how. Either way you look at it, whether you look at it from an inclusion perspective or whether you look at it from a putting them around other kids who are like themselves perspective, neither one of those addresses the challenges they are having in the bigger world. I am in so many spaces with so many neurodivergent adults who are struggling with workplace relationships, romantic relationships, friendships. This stuff doesn't go away. It doesn't get better. And while most people need and want that community part of it, like what I do at Game Time, that community part of it where we're just hanging out together, most of us need and want that in our lives. But if you're struggling socially, there's got to be more to it than just hanging out with other people. There's got to be a way for you to get some support in identifying some of the reasons why you may be struggling socially. And again, even if it's just pointing out, hey, did you notice this kiddo doesn't know how to play? Even if it's just somebody who can point out things like that to you that maybe you didn't notice before, maybe you weren't aware of before. And so I think it has to be both in order for anybody of any age to develop and feel more confident and more competent socially. It has to be both. It has to be the facilitation and instruction and support of someone who is in a position to help. And it has to be the community, the group, the other people who are like me and other people who are not like me. We have to marry both of them together in order to really provide quality social support. So thank you for hanging in there with me. If you hung in there until the end, I love talking about my students. I love talking about what we do and what we talk about in class. So thank you for indulging me.